And we're so delighted to be able to welcome you in on a Friday. We've got a great lineup this time. Again, thanks for making us a part of your day. The D.C. Council is debating the proposed practice facility, a new practice facility for the Washington Wizards. The facility would also host Washington Mystics home games and other events. Now, some lawmakers, some members of D.C. Council, want a limit placed on the amount of tax dollars used for the project. This is the first of several topics we'll tackle today with D.C. Council Chairman Phil Mendelson, who joins us every month at this time. Good to see you as always. Thanks.
Good to be here. Thanks, Bruce.
Thanks so much for coming in. What's your take on this? What do you perceive as the benefits of this proposal if it gets sort of the ultimate green light? And where do you come down on how much money, how much tax money should go into this sort of public-private partnership?
Well, let me start by saying that the Council's had two public hearings on this. We had a hearing in December, shortly after it was announced. And I was quite surprised that there was no testimony in opposition at that hearing. We had a hearing more recently. It was specifically on a bill introduced by Councilmember Silverman and several other council members, which proposes to have a cap on how much we spend. The idea of having a cap, I think, is a good idea. We had a cap on the baseball stadium. We have a cap on the soccer stadium. And what I said at the hearing to Greg Odell, who's the head of Events DC, that will be overseeing the construction, is that, tell us what the cost is going to be, and then stick to it. You can't just tell us a cost, get our buy-in, oh yeah, we support the project, and then the actual cost will be something more and greater. He was pretty clear that the cost will be around $55 million. Now that's excluding some site work that will be done that benefits development over a broader part of the St. Elizabeth's East Campus. It also excludes parking construction, which would be separate from the stadium. But the stadium, or the practice facility, it's not really a stadium, would be about $56 million.
What does the city get?
Well, what the city gets is a number of things. First of all, it gets a real shot in the arm for development at the East Campus. We've been talking about development on the East Campus of the former St. Elizabeth's Mental Hospital for at least a decade, I'd say 3 decades. This will actually jumpstart that development impetus. There already is a developer for a piece of it, and in fact, when we had a hearing on that development, which is separate,
you see benefit coming from Mystics home games and concerts, not from Wizards holding practices, right? I mean, that doesn't do anything, does it?
No, from the practices. But there'll be more economic activity. No, I misspoke. I don't mean from the Wizards practice, although I think that will bring some interest. But from the Mystics, yes. Yeah, there'll be roughly 40 nights where there will be sports events, and then the city will control the arena so that it can rent it out on other nights. So it's expected that there will be, I hesitate to give a number, but I'm going to say at least 100, and maybe more than that.
Do you think the notion of a cap carries the day, wins? Do you think a majority of your colleagues will support the notion of a cap?
The notion of a cap, yes. Legislating it is more difficult because it's not clear who would pay for any overrun. What I expect to happen is in the next month or two that Events DC, which is the arm of the district government constructing the facility, will come back with a more definitive estimate of what the cost will be. I expect it will still be around $55 million.
You mentioned the St. Elizabeth's Hospital. The mayor's nominee for CEO of the hospital withdrew, I guess.
Yeah, now that's a different issue. That's not the East Campus. That's not development. That's the mental hospital itself, which at this point is one building, and it's less than 1,000 patients. Yeah,
was there insufficient vetting?
I don't know what happened there, but it was an embarrassment, and I'm glad that we've put that behind us.
Going back to the facility, we talked with Alyssa Silverman, Councilwoman Alyssa Silverman, about her proposal to limit the amount of public investment in this thing. Who else is putting money in, and who will be overseeing construction so that it comes in terms of actual dollars as close as possible to projected?
Well, the honest answer in terms of who's putting money in is the city. And sometimes the way it's been portrayed as that Monumental Sports, which is the owner of the Wizards, is contributing a small amount of money, but actually what they're doing is they're prepaying the rent. The rent will be something like $5 million over 20 years, and they're prepaying it. So the cost is being borne entirely by the city. Events DC is an arm of the convention center. It's the Sports Entertainment Convention Center Authority. And so they manage RFK, they manage the Armory, and so they have some experience. I believe they built the Nationals baseball stadium. They have experience, and they're the ones who are going to be building and then managing this facility.
Speaking of RFK, we're learning more about what the city thinks might be worth pursuing at the site where dilapidated old RFK Stadium now sits, in terms of something new on that site, maybe getting Dan Snyder's football team to come back to the city, and maybe even, and I confess, I was shocked to hear talk of the Capitals and Wizards moving from Verizon, which I know isn't new, but I don't think of it as old, and certainly it's been a great catalyst for the neighborhood, the Verizon Center neighborhood, that part of downtown, and it's hard to imagine that part of town, not that they couldn't put up residential and other stuff if Verizon got knocked down, but I admit, again, I was shocked to hear talk that, you know, obviously you want to get rid of all the surface parking at RFK. That is such an underutilized site. It's gigantic. It's got water there. It's got great transportation access. Do you have a vision for that site?
Well, I think let's see how these different alternatives play out. I was surprised as well when there was talk about relocating the Verizon Center or the tenants of the Verizon Center. I mean, my recollection is their lease isn't up for 10 years, and so I was surprised at that. You say it's a lot of unused space. In reality, where RFK Stadium is all parkland, and the Park Service gave that or lent it to the district for stadium purposes, and not for economic development, as in office buildings and housing. I think it's appropriate for us to be looking at alternatives to RFK Stadium. It is an old stadium, and back when the National Stadium was being considered, which is like 2004, RFK back then was considered too old and needed to be replaced. But I'm not going to prejudge which alternative is the best.
But you would acknowledge, I think, that there are uses, even under the umbrella of the type that the Park Service envisioned, recreational, et cetera, that are better than surface parking, right? I mean,
better than surface parking, no, of course. You know, that surface parking feels a bit of like a dinosaur from the 1950s. We really ought to be getting away from that and relying more on public transportation. I do want to add this, though.
Sure.
To the extent that folks are talking about a football stadium, if there's public subsidy involved in it, I'm not enthusiastic at all. We now have a variety of stadiums and arenas in the District of Columbia of all different sizes. And the reality is that professional football is, 8, maybe 10 games, I'll say days a year.
Right.
That's out of 365. It's a really small percentage. And we're already paying a lot of public subsidy for baseball and now for the practice facility at St. Elizabeth's and for the soccer stadium. And I think it's time for us to be looking at other important policies like homelessness, affordable housing, and so forth.
Can you talk about the reaction that the mayor's plan for having smaller facilities for people experiencing a housing challenge? Her vision is to have something across the city, not overly focused in one area. What are you hearing? What's the general barometer of reaction?
Well, you know, I remind folks that when she first announced her proposal, it was expected, and I'd even say understood, that there was going to be opposition across the city to the idea of replacing one facility, DC General, with 7 facilities scattered around in the different wards. The fact is that there's buy-in at this point, and there's no question but that the council supports and the council will vote for 7 smaller shelters. But there's been a lot of concern, legitimately, over the cost. And, you know, I was thinking about that today because there's some folks who are saying that, well, you know, the purpose is noble. It's to replace DC General and to provide shelter for homeless families, as if to say it doesn't matter what the cost is. And I was thinking of what kind of a metaphor I could use. So we all agree that I should we should have 3 meals a day. But it isn't the same thing as, well, I should spend $500-600 for dinner tonight at Ruth's Chris Steakhouse. And maybe not even at Ruth's Chris Steakhouse. I'll spend $500 or $600 for dinner tonight at McDonald's. And that's really what the issue here is, whether we are spending the dollars, these proposed leases, wisely.
Talking with D.C. Council Chairman Phil Mendelson, as we do each month here on News Talk. A break. Back with more of the program right after this.